and a lot of it hurts people. Beauty's not supposed to hurt, but when it's defined as something only 1% of the people can achieve in the advertisements and the models, it has its own sanctions, and they're not just social sanctions, they're employment sanctions as well. So in many ways we grow up corporate, which is why you look at those presidential debates and they don't ask about corporate crime, they don't ask about corporate welfare, they don't ask about giveaway of the Commonwealth, the resources of public lands and public airways of the candidates. They're never asked. There's a huge language of avoidance. I hope you remember that word, the language of avoidance is very important. You'll go to professional meetings, legal meetings and other meetings when you're counseled to various NGOs and corporate and trade associations, and you'll see, once you're alert to it, what is not talked about. When I started going after GM and the auto companies, and I wasn't much older than you were because I lost a lot of my friends in traffic crashes, high school, college, law school, and then I began to learn that they could have been saved by long-held safety devices like seat belts and airbags and padded dash panels and stronger door latches and head restraints and even something as simple as a breakaway rear view mirror, which now you have in your car. I got very angry. And when I got angry, I started asking questions that I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't angry. Even if I knew everything I knew, if I wasn't angry, if I didn't have fire in my belly, which psychologists now call emotional intelligence, I would not have had a level of determination and intensity to hitchhike again and again from Connecticut to Washington, D.C. in order to develop contacts to federally regulate that industry. I remember once I was picked up in Delaware by a truck driver, and we started talking. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Washington, D.C. And he said, "What for?" I said, "To federally regulate the motor vehicle industry for safety." And he looked at me like this. I thought he was going to go over to the side of the road and leave me off for a minute. But you see, the American dream for me was justice. The great work of human beings on earth is what Senator Daniel Webster described as justice. And so let's move to another test of whether you grow up corporate. Ask your friends what they think of the minute you use the following words: crime, welfare, regulation. Crime, welfare, regulation, and violence. And they'll come back with street violence, war, rape, people waiting for their welfare check, government regulation. You say, well, that's certainly within the definition, but quantitatively speaking, far more people die, get sick, and are injured in this country because of corporate crime. Just look, 58,000 people a year die from work-related diseases and trauma, according to OSHA. 65,000 die from air pollution, according to EPA. Over 100,000 die from medical negligence in hospitals, Harvard School of Public Health. 18,000 die because they can't afford health insurance. No one dies in Canada or Belgium or Italy or Sweden or France or Germany because they can't afford health insurance, because they're insured from the day they die. But you see, those are all forms of violence that are traceable to corporate power, negligence, crime, or cutting corners. Therefore, that isn't the definition that we associate when we hear the word violence. 16,000 homicides in this country. Compare that with corporate-induced deaths, for starters. Welfare, there's more taxpayer dollars going to corporate welfare subsidies. I mean, just as we speak, they're bailing out Citibank. They bailed out Wall Street. They're loan guaranteeing new nuclear plants that can't be built without 100% Uncle Sam loan guarantee, because the nuclear companies can't get private financing without that kind of guarantee. They're ready to bail out the auto companies, but not a $300 a month welfare mother. So welfare is associated with a single mom welfare, $300, etc., but not with the big boys who are on welfare. Regulation, what do you think the fine print is in these contracts of adhesion? They're a form of private corporate regulation of the transactions between you, a very powerless consumer, up against the non-competitive deployment of these contracts of adhesion. So crime, Corporate crime steals far more than burglaries. It isn't even close. Far more. Look at the figures in terms of what people are losing from just the non-enforcement of the insurance laws at the state level. A recent estimate had it at $70 billion a year people are losing. That's just one industry. And the coal industry, since 1890, over 500,000 coal miners have given their lives for their companies. Coal miner pneumoconiosis, black lung disease from breathing the dust, and coal mine accident collapses. And that's more Americans who died in that one industry than all Americans who died in World War II. That's just one industry. See how we grow up corporate? Violence, regulation, welfare, etc. We're not defining them also to include the corporate reality of what is happening. Let's move on to government crime. Bush has given us a very intellectually intense menu on that score. This is the most impeachable presidency in American history, easily. And we're not talking about, one-time Watergate obstruction of justice or lying about sex under oath, as Clinton was subjected to in terms of his being impeached in the House. We're talking about 5 systemic, repeated categories of high crimes and misdemeanors. The criminal war invasion of Iraq, the denial of habeas corpus and charges for people who were thrown in jail, a lot of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, by Ashcroft and his successor Gonzales. The third is systemic torture. The fourth, condoned right at the top, now we know that for a fact, right out of Bush and Clinton. The fourth is snooping and spying on Americans without judicial warrant. That's a first-class felony with a maximum jail term of 5 years. And the fifth are the signing statements, over 100, more than any other dozens of prior presidents, where Bush signs a bill into law and says, I'll decide whether to enforce or obey it or not. The American Bar Association, to its credit, in 2005-2006, you can't get more conservative lawyers, right? They sent Bush 3 reports charging him with serious violations of the Constitution. Serious, repeated violations of the Constitution. They didn't use the word high crimes and misdemeanor, and they didn't use the word impeachment. But that's what the import of their findings clearly indicate. They left that up to Congress and the courts to adjudicate. Now, here we have a very interesting phenomenon where the Democrats took impeachment off the table when they became in control of Congress in January 2007. Pelosi and Reid actually had a statement to the press. Impeachment off the table. Now, does that violate their oath under the Constitution? I think it does, because privately they have said 100 times they think Bush has committed huge numbers of high crimes and misdemeanors. And they are basically detonating their oath under the Constitution to invoke the impeachment provision and start the proceedings in the House of Representatives. What they are in effect doing is saying that there can be massive systemic daily crimes in the U.S. executive office, in the executive branch of the U.S. government, but there are no criminals. Crimes without criminals. Wouldn't that be a nice third-year paper? Crimes without criminals. And the condoning of these crimes and the prospect that on January 21st or 20th, Bush and Cheney will sail out of Washington on their way back to Texas without any sheriffs pursuing them, without any attorney, district attorney, state or federal, impaneling a grand jury, is to set the stage for Barack Obama, if he inherits the war crime activities of George W. Bush, he will be a war criminal by February 1, unless he engages in immediate executive orders and directives to reverse course in each one of these 5 categories. And in a 97-page report by the ACLU that just came out, they basically said to Obama, here's what you have to do to restore civil liberties and the rule of law in America. And not far from here, anybody here ever hear of the Meikle-John Civil Liberties Institute? Anybody? Nobody? Once again. Now, Anne Fagan